The battle arena was unlike any the human warrior had faced before. It wasn't a traditional arena. It was a desolate stretch of barren land, scattered with jagged rocks and craters left by ancient impacts. Above, the sky shimmered with unfamiliar stars, stars belonging to an empire that had never known defeat. The alien woman, named Silara, stood tall and imposing, her metallic armor gleaming under the twin suns. She was a sight to behold. Her species, the Zinthari, were known for their strength and speed. They had no equal in hand-to-hand combat, and their advanced technology made them nearly unstoppable. Silara's towering presence was a silent testament to the might of her people, and she held a weapon, a long spear-like device, that could cut through steel with ease. On the opposite side of the arena, the human warrior, Commander Eli Vance, took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the battlefield. His armor was more practical, designed for durability rather than intimidation. The humans had never fought a foe like the Zinthari before, but they had fought wars against species who thought they were superior. And they had always found a way to win. He felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. This wasn't just about one man against one alien. It was about proving that humanity had a place in the galaxy. "You must be brave," Silara's voice echoed, carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. Her tone was both mocking and impressed. "Or foolish, I do not know which. You think you can defeat me?" Eli didn't respond immediately. He had no words to waste. Instead, he adjusted the grip on his energy blade, the only weapon capable of matching the Zinthari's technology. He could feel the pulse of the blade humming in his hand, a reminder of humanity's ingenuity. "You're wrong about us," Eli finally said, his voice calm but steady. "We're not afraid to fight for what's ours." Silara chuckled, the sound cold and indifferent. "You humans are amusing. Perhaps this will be a challenge after all." Without another word, she lunged forward with blinding speed. Her spear shimmered as it sliced through the air, a blur of deadly intent. Eli barely had time to react as he sidestepped, the tip of the spear missing him by mere inches. The ground beneath his feet cracked as she pivoted, striking again. This time, he blocked with his energy blade, sparks flying upon contact, the force of her strike pushing him back. Silara's eyes narrowed. She hadn't expected him to move that fast, to react so quickly. She swung again, this time aiming lower, trying to catch him off guard. But Eli, thinking faster, crouched and used his agility to avoid the blow, bringing his blade up to parry a follow-up strike. It was clear. He wasn't just reacting. He was thinking. And that, she realized, was where the true challenge lay. Silara's smirk deepened as she observed Eli's evasive maneuvers. To any other warrior, such speed would have been considered a mark of skill. But Silara wasn't fooled. She had fought races far stronger, faster, and more resilient than humans. She had seen them all try and fail before, and she had crushed each one beneath her boot. Eli was no different, she told herself, merely a human, a creature of insignificant potential. Her spear whirred through the air again, a lethal arc aimed at Eli's side. This time, she wasn't just testing him. She was trying to break him. The Zinthari were known for their direct, overwhelming attacks, and she believed she could end this duel with a single decisive blow. But Eli once again dodged. His reflexes were sharp, but it was his mind that impressed her. Instead of retreating, he had an uncanny ability to anticipate her movements. His eyes, focused and calculating, never left her as he ducked and sidestepped, always staying just out of range of her spear. Silara's lips curled upward in appreciation. "You are agile, human. I will give you that," she said, her voice low, tinged with both amusement and irritation. "But you cannot outrun me forever." With that, she shifted her stance, lowering her weapon and assuming a more defensive position. She was still confident in her superior strength and technology, but she also knew the importance of strategy. The longer this battle went on, the more likely it was that her opponent might find an opening, something Silara had no intention of allowing. Eli's mind raced as he analyzed her every movement. The alien's confidence was almost palpable, but it was also becoming her weakness. He knew that Silara had underestimated him, which meant that she was not yet fighting to her full potential. She was relying too much on her strength, and not enough on adaptability, a mistake many warriors made when facing an opponent they viewed as inferior. He darted forward, closing the gap between them in a blur of motion, and feigned a strike to her right. Silara reacted instantly, twisting her body to intercept. But that's exactly what Eli wanted. He quickly reversed his direction, ducking under her spear and delivering a precise blow to the lower half of her armor. The strike didn't penetrate, but it landed solidly, sending a jolt of feedback into her body. For the first time, Silara faltered. The blow hadn't been fatal, but it was enough to make her reconsider her approach. She straightened herself, an unreadable expression crossing her face. "You're more resourceful than I thought, human," she admitted, her voice a mix of admiration and a flicker of doubt. She wasn't used to being challenged, but it won't save you. Eli didn't respond. He simply adjusted his stance and waited, knowing this was only the beginning. Silara's eyes narrowed as she studied Eli, her mind racing to adapt. She had never encountered an enemy who could read her movements with such precision. Every strike, every feint, seemed to be countered before she could land it. The human warrior's reflexes were fast, uncomfortably fast, and his ability to anticipate her next move was starting to fray at the edges of her confidence. For a moment, Silara hesitated. Was this human really so different from the others? She had witnessed countless civilizations bow before her, their warriors crumbling under the weight of her superiority. But Eli wasn't like the others. He didn't just survive by dodging. He was thinking, adapting, waiting for an opportunity. And now that he had tasted a small victory, however minor, she felt the change in the air. Eli, on the other hand, remained focused. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his breathing steady despite the intensity of the battle. His muscles burned, his body screamed for rest, but he couldn't afford to show weakness. He had faced down battles before, but none like this. No alien had ever fought him with such precision and power. Still, he wasn't backing down. He watched Silara's body language, taking in every small shift, every slight angle her spear was held at. It was all part of the puzzle he was trying to solve. Humans weren't the strongest species in the galaxy, but they had something the Zinthari didn't: an unwavering will to fight and an ability to adapt in the heat of battle. A sudden thought crossed Eli's mind. The Zinthari's strength and speed were undeniable, but there was one thing they likely didn't expect from humans: ingenuity. Humans didn't win because they were the strongest. They won because they could outthink their enemies, exploit their weaknesses, and use the environment to their advantage. Silara launched another quick series of strikes, moving faster than before. Her spear flashed like lightning as she sought to overwhelm him. But Eli's reaction was almost instinctive. He darted backward, weaving through the jagged terrain, his boots kicking up dust as he used the rocks to create distance. He knew he couldn't keep up with her in pure speed, but if he could force her into a mistake, just one opening, he could land a decisive blow. Silara didn't relent. She rushed after him, her face a mask of determination. But this time, Eli wasn't running. As she lunged toward him, he timed his move perfectly, sidestepping her strike and using her momentum against her. His blade flashed out, nicking her armor once more. It wasn't a clean hit, but it was enough to make her pause, enough to show her that he wasn't just some pawn in her game. "Clever," Silara muttered, though there was no hint of admiration in her voice, only frustration. But not clever enough. Eli didn't reply. He didn't need to. His focus was unshakable. This battle wasn't just about strength. It was about outlasting her, outsmarting her. And that, he knew, was humanity's greatest weapon. Silara's patience was wearing thin. She had fought countless battles, but this human was proving to be unlike any opponent she had faced before. His movements were unpredictable, and his tactics were growing more cunning with each passing moment. She could feel the shift in the momentum of the fight, something she wasn't used to. For the first time in a long while, she found herself having to think before every strike. Her spear flashed forward again, but this time, Eli didn't evade it. Instead, he parried with a fluid motion, using his energy blade to deflect her attack at the last possible second. The impact of their weapons sent a shockwave through the air, but Eli didn't flinch. His feet slid backward across the uneven ground as he absorbed the force, but he was already planning his next move. Scylla stepped back, her eyes narrowing. The human warrior had shown more than just agility. He had shown an understanding of her every move. She knew that if she didn't adapt quickly, she would lose. And losing was not something the Zinthari did. The thought of defeat, even the possibility of it, stirred something deep within her, a primal, burning desire to end this battle once and for all. She lunged again, faster this time, trying to catch him off guard. But Eli had anticipated this. As she closed the distance between them, he ducked under her strike, his body almost sinking to the ground in a crouch. He quickly shifted his weight, using the low position to slide behind her. Scylla was already spinning to meet him, her spear moving with a deadly arc, but she was too slow. Eli reacted just in time, his energy blade flashing once more as he cut through the air, narrowly missing her armor, but landing a glancing blow to the side of her leg. The alien woman stumbled, her armor denting under the strike, the impact sending a jolt of pain up her limb. Scylla growled, a sound of pure frustration, but also something else. Recognition. She had underestimated him. The human speed, his precision. It was more than just skill. He was adapting to the rhythm of the fight, using her own power against her. She attempted another strike, this one more focused, hoping to overpower him with sheer force. But Eli was already gone, slipping away into the shadows of the craters and rocks. His mind was working faster than her instincts. Every time she attacked, he was already one step ahead. She realized, then, that this battle wasn't just about physical strength. It was about strategy, about the ability to adapt. And that was something the Zinthari hadn't counted on. For the first time, she felt doubt. The human warrior, Eli, was no longer just a pawn in her game. He was her equal, perhaps even more. Scylla's chest heaved with each breath, her pulse quickening. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The human warrior had already seen through her tactics, and now his every move was a question she couldn't answer. Her spear had never felt so heavy in her hand. She could feel the sting of the glancing blows Eli had landed, each one a reminder that she wasn't invincible, that her arrogance had brought her to this moment. The battle was no longer about proving superiority. It was about survival. Eli, meanwhile, was in his element. The human spirit, so often underestimated by the galaxy's other species, was burning bright within him. He wasn't just fighting for victory. He was fighting for humanity's place in the cosmos. Every step he took, every decision he made, came from that deep-seated belief that humanity could and would stand tall against any threat. The Zinthari may have conquered worlds, but they had never faced a species like his. A species that could fall, rise, and keep going, no matter the odds. As the alien woman lunged at him again, her speed undeniable, Eli's mind raced. She was powerful, but he was quick enough to stay one step ahead. His energy blade hummed, a reassuring weight in his hand. This wasn't about sheer strength. He didn't need to overpower her. He just needed to outlast her, to expose her flaws. Scylla struck once more, her spear flashing in a perfect arc aimed directly at his heart. But Eli was already moving. With a sharp pivot, he ducked low and slid behind a nearby boulder, using the terrain to create distance. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained clear. Every move, every breath, was calculated. Scylla growled in frustration, watching him disappear behind the rock. She followed, her steps swift, But her confidence had been replaced by caution. She had learned to respect her opponent, and that respect made her hesitant. She couldn't simply charge forward and expect victory, as she had before. She needed to rethink her strategy. She needed to push him into a mistake. The moments of silence between them were deafening. Eli knew this was his chance. He waited, watching for any opening, for the slightest shift in her posture. As Scylla rounded the boulder, she swung her spear with deadly intent. But this time, Eli was ready. He sprang forward, anticipating her move, and with a fluid motion, he deflected her strike. His blade met her spear with a sharp clash, and in that instant, he saw the vulnerability in her eyes. Scylla had been overconfident. The human warrior had taken the game to her. Eli's next move was deliberate. He didn't charge in recklessly. He stayed patient, watching as she tried to regain her footing. The battle had gone on long enough for him to know one thing. She was beginning to tire. The strength of her attacks was waning. And that, Eli realized, was the key. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was winning. Scylla stumbled, her grip on her spear faltering for the briefest moment. Her breath was ragged, each inhalation heavier than the last. The alien warrior's mind raced, but her body was beginning to betray her. The energy of the initial confrontation had worn off, and the strain of the battle was settling into her muscles like a tightening vice. She had always relied on her strength, her speed, and her endurance to overwhelm her enemies. But this human, Eli, was not following the script. He was still standing, his energy blade humming with an almost serene focus, and the faintest smile playing at the corners of his lips. The realization hit her like a blow to the chest. She was losing. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The Syntheri had never been defeated by a human warrior before. In fact, the thought of it was absurd. She had underestimated the depths of the human spirit, and now it was coming back to haunt her. Eli noticed the shift in her movements, the slowing of her strikes, the subtle signs of fatigue. Her once crisp attacks were becoming sloppy, and her hesitation was growing more evident with every step. She was no longer as certain in her movements as she had been at the start of the fight. This was his moment. He had the advantage now, and he wasn't going to waste it. Taking a deep breath, Eli shifted his stance, planting his feet firmly on the uneven terrain. He could see the weariness in Scylla's eyes, the flicker of doubt. She was still dangerous, no less lethal for the fatigue that weighed on her, but now he could see her limitations. He moved first, darting forward in a blur of motion. Scylla swung her spear with all the might she could muster, but Eli anticipated the strike, sidestepping just out of reach. Her weapon slammed into the ground with a force that reverberated through the craters, sending up a cloud of dust. For a moment, she was exposed, off balance. That was all Eli needed. In a swift motion, he closed the gap between them, his blade flashing out in a controlled strike. He aimed for the joint in her armor, a weak point he had been studying since the beginning. The energy blade sliced through the air, making contact with the edge of her armor. Sparks flew, and Scylla recoiled in pain, her eyes widening as the realization settled in. He had found the flaw in her seemingly impenetrable defense. For the first time, Scylla hesitated. Her spear was now a burden, her breathing shallow as she tried to regain control of her body. The battle was no longer about power. It was about resilience, and Eli had more of it than she had expected. Eli stepped back, his eyes locked onto her. His stance was poised, calm, and calculated. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. The longer they'd fought, the more she would tire. And the more she tired, the closer he came to victory. Not bad for a human, Scylla muttered, her voice strained. But I won't let you win. Eli's answer was simple, his voice steady. You already lost. Scylla's confidence, once unwavering, now teetered on the edge of collapse. The crack in her armor where Eli had struck her burned like a constant reminder of how the tide had turned. She had never known such frustration, never imagined that a human could push her to this point. She had faced enemies who had challenged her strength, but none had ever dared to make her question her superiority. Her eyes darted across the battlefield, scanning for something, anything, that could turn the fight in her favor. But there was nothing. The rocky terrain was unforgiving, and Eli had already proven himself too agile, too clever. She had fought fiercely, yet here she was, cornered not by brute force, but by her own underestimation of the human spirit. Her spear was still poised, but the once feared weapon felt heavy in her grasp, its shine now dull against the backdrop of an impending defeat. She could hear Eli's steady breathing from across the field, his movements slow but deliberate. He had all but stopped advancing, giving her space to breathe, to gather herself, but in reality, he was only waiting for her to make the next mistake. Silara tightened her grip on her spear, refusing to admit weakness. She straightened her back, steeling herself for the final phase of the fight. She couldn't let him win. Not like this. She had to end it now. With a fierce yell, she surged forward, the ground trembling under her feet as she launched herself toward Eli with the force of a falling meteor. Her spear sliced the air, its deadly point aimed straight for his chest. There would be no more hesitation, no more games. This was her last attack, her final effort to break him. Eli's eyes never left her. He didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He knew exactly what was coming. At the last possible moment, Silara's spear thrust forward, aiming to pierce him. But Eli was already moving. He sidestepped just as he had done countless times before, but this time he was faster. His energy blade flashed, and with a precise, controlled movement, he disarmed her, his blade striking at the base of her spear. The weapon flew from her hands, spinning through the air, and landed with a thud far behind them. For a split second, Silara stood frozen, her eyes locked on the spot where her spear had fallen. The reality of the moment hit her like a wave. She was unarmed, vulnerable. She was facing the human, one who had shown no sign of backing down, who had weathered her attacks and outlasted her fury. Eli took a step toward her, his blade still raised, but not in threat, just in readiness. Silara's chest heaved with anger and disbelief. She had fought for so long, only to be bested by a human. But Eli wasn't gloating. He wasn't celebrating. "You've lost," he said quietly, his voice firm, but without malice. "And this time, it's not because you weren't strong enough. It's because you didn't understand what it meant to be human." The silence between them was deafening. Silara stood, weaponless, her chest heaving with frustration and disbelief. Her body trembled, not from the weight of the fight, but from the overwhelming realization that the human before her had defeated her, not with superior strength or technology, but with something far deeper. Eli's eyes met hers, not with hatred or triumph, but with something far more unsettling: pity. Silara's gaze flickered to her fallen spear, the weapon that had carried her through countless battles. Now useless at her feet, her entire identity had been built on the strength of the Zinthari, on their unyielding power, and yet here she was, beaten by a human, a species she had once deemed inferior. Her pride, her very sense of self, crumbled in that moment. Eli didn't move toward her. He didn't need to. He knew she wasn't going to strike again. The battle had ended. It had been decided the moment she had underestimated him. "I told you." Eli's voice was steady, his words cutting through the tension. "You lost because you couldn't see past your own arrogance. You thought we were beneath you. That was your mistake." Silara swallowed hard, struggling to regain her composure. She wanted to retaliate, to say something, anything that would salvage her dignity. But there was nothing. The fight had been long, exhausting, and in the end, she had been outsmarted by a human. With a final, almost imperceptible movement, Silara lowered her head in acceptance. It wasn't a gesture of submission, but one of realization. She had faced defeat. The alien warrior who had conquered countless worlds was brought to her knees by a human. Eli, sensing her capitulation, finally lowered his blade, though his stance remained ready. He had no need to kill her. There was no honor in that. Instead, he extended his hand toward her, an offering, a sign of respect. "Let's end this with honor," he said. "I'll let you go." Silara stared at the offered hand, her mind racing. There was a part of her that wanted to refuse, to fight on until her last breath. But that part was small now. The fight had already been decided. She was defeated. And despite everything, despite her pride, her rage, her shame, she knew that in the end, she was not without honor. Slowly, she extended her hand, grasping his. It was not the handshake of a victor and a defeated foe. It was the handshake of two warriors, one who had learned the cost of arrogance, and the other who had shown the true strength of humanity. As their hands met, Eli nodded once, acknowledging her, and then he stepped back, turning away. He had won the battle, but more than that, he had proven that humanity could not be underestimated. And Silara, for the first time, understood that not all victories came from the blade.